The episode opens up with us seeing a flashback of the events that took place in the previous episode. Ash bids farewell to Red and his Pikachu, with Zygarde telling Ash to meet him at Viridian Forest the next day. As Zygarde disappears, Ash and Pikachu both look to the sky feeling confused, and Ash asks Pikachu what just happened. The pair begin to head back to Pallet Town, and during this time, Ash thinks about what Zygarde said to him. Pikachu looks up at his beloved trainer feeling concerned. We then skip to see 5 Zygarde calls gathered around the tree log. Each Zygarde is coloured differently to one another, with Squishy stating that it's time for the boy and his Pokemon to reach their next potential. They then all begin to transform into different Zygarde forms, with some looking different compared to the usual. Meanwhile, in a remote location, we see a Team Rocket scientist examining a green test tube. Contained within the test tube is a Zygarde cell. The scientist then reports to someone mentioning that the tests have come back positive, and as the individual walks forward, we see the leader of Team Rocket, Giovanni, returning. He responds by saying the word excellent, and begins to laugh menacingly. He then tells another scientist to begin the cloning and extraction process before staring at another green test tube to where a Pokemon is currently wired up and sleeping within it. Ash returns home for dinner, and Delia smiles knowing that her son made it back home safely. We then skip to see Ash in bed thinking about the events that happened. He speaks to himself wondering what Zygarde meant about how a war is approaching. He then recalls how Zygarde mentioned to only bring 3 Pokemon with him for when they meet at Viridian Forest, once again confused as to why these 3 Pokemon were specifically requested. Ash speaks to himself, saying I wonder how Red is getting on, before closing his eyes and falling asleep. As this happens, we see the night sky above his home before transitioning to 2 random locations where 2 more wormholes appear. The next day we see Ash and Pikachu leaving Oak's lab, with him thanking the professor before heading out. Ash clips 2 Pokeballs onto his belt. Both him and Pikachu then set out to Viridian Forest. Upon arriving at the forest, Ash tells Pikachu that this was the spot where Zygarde told him to meet them. However, the Pokemon is not in sight. He then takes a step forward and falls into a hole that leads into an underground bunker. As Ash lands, he mentions how he was not given any warning about the booby trap. The bunker shows no sign of light at all, and Ash kindly asks his partner to spark up some light for them to be able to navigate. Walking further into the bunker, Ash is concerned that he has never come across this part of the forest before, and wonders what else lies ahead. As he walks through, he encounters a lake with green coloured water. As Ash approaches the lake, he sees 4 Pokemon surrounding it. These 4 Pokemon are Zygardes in their 50% forms. Ash notices the Pokemon and says their name, recognizing that there are a total of 4 of the Pokemon before seeing Squishy reveal itself from the group. Ash is in shock to see Squishy again and questions what's going on. Squishy thanks Ash for meeting them and tells him that a huge threat is approaching the Kanto region. Squishy begins to tell Ash that not long ago, one of its sister's calls named Z5 was recently captured by Team Rocket. The malicious organization caught the Pokemon as they wanted to conduct an experiment. Z5 had its DNA and cells extracted from itself, and during the time it was caught, it learned that Giovanni was planning to create a Pokemon to take over the world. After completing an experiment on the Pokemon, Z5 used its last capabilities to combine with the remaining cells in hopes of fleeing. The levels of energy backfired, causing an explosion, allowing the core to have enough energies and cells to transform into its 10% form and escape. However, some of the cells were still confined and they weren't able to flee. Ash begins to sweat and is shocked after hearing Giovanni's name, and Z5 then begins to explain that he also captured a humanoid looking Pokemon to which he was manipulating the DNA of the Pokemon. Pikachu begins to frown. Squishy then begins to explain that combining its DNA with this Pokemon, not only could it cause a catastrophe among people and Pokemon, but the whole world could be affected. Squishy continues to explain that the cells have been scattered around the world, monitoring the ecosystem. They sent signals to the cores alerting them about a threat ahead, and have discovered that Giovanni has gone insane, with the ultimate goal being world domination. The Pokemon that Giovanni captured is said to be a Pokemon he once had history with, and as soon as Squishy concludes the sentence, Ash is in disbelief to learn that the Pokemon Giovanni may have caught again could be Mewtwo. Ash remembers how he was reunited with Mewtwo not long ago, recollecting the previous encounters he had with the legendary Pokemon. He urges Z5 to confirm if this was the Pokemon that Giovanni trapped within the lab. Z5 stares at Ash with no response. Squishy tells Ash that Mewtwo has been taken under Giovanni's control, and with the energy from Zygarde cells being mutated in an unhealthy manner, this can cause the Pokemon to be oblivious to its own thoughts. Ash then questions Squishy and the Zygarde on how they can stop Giovanni, and Z2 responds by saying that they are going to test to see if Ash and his Pokemon are worthy of obtaining a hidden power. Squishy mentions that besides the cells keeping an eye on the ecosystem, they have also been watching Ash across his journey, learning how he has befriended more Pokemon and accomplished new achievements along the way. They also understand that he is continuing his quest of becoming a Pokemon master. Ash gasps after hearing this statement. Squishy then goes on to explain that there was a reason why they asked for Ash to only bring 3 Pokemon with him. Out of nowhere, the 2 Pokeballs on Ash's belt react to this message. The first Pokemon revealed is Greninja, with the second Pokemon being Charizard. Greninja nods its head acknowledging both Squishy and Z2, whilst Charizard looks directly at the family of the legendary Pokémon. Pikachu then leaps forward and joins its companions. Squishy tells the three Pokémon that they have been chosen for a great purpose and states that one of them will reach a new potential. It then goes on to say that Ash and his Pokémon will train against its brothers and sisters, with each battle showing a different power of Zygarde. Should they defeat the Zygarde army, then they will lend Ash and his Pokémon their strength. Suddenly, the Zygarde cells begin to release from the Zygardes, reverting back into their cores. Ash is in shock as he discovers the 5 Zygarde cores before him. Each core is coloured differently, showing colours of red, blue, white, orange, and cyan. Squishy says that the Zygarde army will challenge Ash and his 3 Pokémon in preparation for the calamity ahead. Ash vows to give it his all with his Pokémon in hopes of stopping Giovanni. The Zygarde cores then begin to scurry off down a tunnel, and Ash questions where they're going. Pikachu jumps on the back of Charizard, and Greninja and Ash begin to chase after them. Ash speaks to himself whilst running and questions where they're going. The cores approach the end of a tunnel, and the light at the end is revealed. As Ash and Pikachu exit the tunnel, he sees Squishy and Z2 at the top of a rock, with the remaining cores beneath them. Z2 says that there will be 3 cores that will challenge them in battle. Z2 then tells Ash to prepare himself for combat and bring his full force of power with him. It mentions that if his team wins, the Zygarde will grant them their power. Ash begins to speak to his team and tells them to stay aware of the Zygarde army, as their power is beyond imaginable. He also tells his Pokémon to remember what he told them the night before leaving. We then see a shot of all of Ash's gimmicks on both of his wrists. Ash then shouts to Squishy saying that he is ready, and the battle begins. Ash starts off by choosing Greninja as his first Pokémon. The first Zygarde core to fight is the cyan coloured core named Z4. Ash commands Greninja to use Water Shuriken, whilst Z4 charges forward. Pikachu is concerned as to why the core has not transformed into a more attacking form. As Water Shuriken fires forward, Z4 dodges the attack and then headbutts Greninja in the chest. By pure surprise, the impact of this attack sends Greninja flying into a wall with rocks crashing on top of it. Ash is lost for words and questions if cores are capable of fighting with that much power without needing to transform. Ash turns his head and calls Greninja's name, with Greninja leaping out of the rocks. The orange coloured core named Z3 is impressed, thinking its brother secured an easy win. Meanwhile, Z5 frowns and watches carefully. Charizard then turns its head and looks at Z5 from a distance. Ash then tells Greninja to use Double Team, while Z4 begins to transform. Cells begin to react, and as Ash commands Greninja to use another Water Shuriken, Z4 dodges the attack and reveals its 10% form. High above Greninja in the sky, it then uses Dragon Pulse and lands a hit. Greninja takes damage, but is still in good fighting spirit. Ash commands Greninja to use Double Team again, while Z4 begins to run forward. Ash then tells Greninja to focus its aura to pinpoint when Z4 will attack. Using the Bond phenomenon, Ash and Greninja are able to see a blue light, guiding them to a weak spot on the Zygarde. Ash then commands Greninja to jump and use Night Slash, landing a hit on Z4. Z4 is then pushed back, and it begins to use the move Thousand Waves. The power of the attack causes shards of rock to emerge from the ground, and Ash tells Greninja to bounce off them. We see Greninja show off its ninja capabilities in this moment, and Pikachu is mesmerized by the performance. Ash then tells Greninja to use Water Shuriken again, which lands another successful hit on Z4. Z4 is then on the ground at a standstill. Ash jumps thinking that they defeated the Pokemon, however Charizard pauses the celebration and looks to the sky. We then see more cells begin to react, and Z3 begins to mention that Z4 is now beginning its response. The 10% form begins to shine green, and we see more cells insert and react to the Pokemon. Ash is stunned, and before he can mention the name, we see Z4 reveal itself in its 50% form. Ash and his Pokemon gasp, and Ash tells himself that he has still so much more to learn about Zygarde. Back in the Alola region, Kukui is monitoring a projector that shows him various locations around the world of Pokemon. He then hears his son Lei calling for him. He tells his son that he'll be with him shortly. Leaving his chair, Kukui misses the reaction of wormholes appearing. The projector shows that 2 random wormholes appear in different locations, with a third then revealing itself afterwards. However, the third wormhole is coloured red and has a larger radius compared to the usual. Skipping back to the battle, Greninja uses Water Shuriken, while Z4 begins to use Thousand Arrows. Both attacks collide with a smokescreen forming. Ash then commands Greninja to start circling Zygarde. Greninja begins to run at lightning speed, and Ash then tells Greninja to use Double Team. The combination of the attack and the Pokemon running causes more clones to appear than usual. However, Ash is oblivious to this. Pikachu on the other hand notices that something is different. Z4 then uses extreme speed to destroy the clones, leaving the real Greninja form vulnerable. It then redirects the attack, pushing itself and Greninja higher into the sky. Ash shouts to Greninja to dodge the attack, however Greninja is too high in the sky to hear him. Squishy and Z2 communicate, questioning if Ash has the capability to help its Pokemon reach new potentials. However, Ash intervenes and tells the cause that it's not over yet, and tells Greninja to use Ice Beam on Z4. Leaping off Z4's head, Greninja then fires the attack, landing mega damage on the Pokemon. The effects of the attack then cause Zygarde to freeze, making it then pause its attack and begin to rapidly fall. As the Pokemon crashes into the ground, Greninja leaps out of the smokescreen feeling relieved. However, as the smoke subsides, we see Z4 thawed out of the ice, lifting itself up like nothing happened. Greninja is shocked, and Ash is confused as to how this Pokemon is still standing, despite the combination of attack and impact. Z5 mocks Ash and calls him a foolish human, and after hearing this comment, Charizard fires a flamethrower at the core. A reaction is caused by Squishy and Z2, creating a barrier to defend their sister core. Ash tells Charizard to calm down, where Squishy tells Z5 that she too will have her turn soon. Ash tells Charizard not to worry, and he flies up and sits on a rock, getting a better aerial view of the battle. Greninja then turns its head to acknowledge Charizard. Ash tells Z5 that he understands that she must be upset, especially with what happened to her, and that she may not trust humans. Ash says he can relate to this, as he has had various confrontations with Pokemon, finding it hard to trust him. However, he tells the core that he is not their enemy, and he will prove that he is worthy of wielding such power and the trust of befriended Pokemon. Ash then tells Greninja that it's time, and we then both see him and his Pokemon use the bond phenomenon. Ash-Greninja is then revealed. Z3 speaks, saying that he is intrigued to see how this battle will go. Ash then tells Greninja that they will show them their true power. Z4 begins to use extreme speed, and Ash commands Greninja to use Double Team, followed by an Ice Beam. Ash then commands Greninja to use Water Shuriken, to which this time a larger blue Shuriken is formed. Ash is puzzled as he understands that sometimes Greninja can use larger Water Shurikens than usual. Pikachu is also confused. Z4 then uses Dragon Pulse, however Greninja slices the attack in half by using Night Slash. It then fires another Ice Beam, landing a hit on the Pokemon. Z4 retaliates with 1000 arrows, which ends up landing damage on Greninja. Ash and Greninja both get hurt in sync, however Greninja charges forward unfazed. Ash is astonished by Greninja's determination, and Squishy looks impressed to see how his old friend is still in good fighting spirit. Greninja lands various attacks on Z4, however the Dragon Serpent reacts with a strong extreme speed, driving Greninja into another wall. Ash screams Greninja's name, however once again Greninja is unfazed. Ash asks himself what happened to Greninja, and Z2 answers by saying that the power of the bomb phenomenon has unlocked something in Greninja. Z2 mentions that after all of the history the Pokemon has had with Ash, it has achieved something new with its power. The core then continues to mention that there is something else, however Greninja continues to attack and slowly begins to get tired. Ash tells Greninja to keep up the good work, and tells his Pokemon to finish the battle with an Ice Beam. However Greninja ends up using a Water Shuriken again, but this time forming a large orange Shuriken. Ash then gasps, saying there it is again, recalling how the last time he saw this move was against Alana and Tobias, still confused as to how it was formed. Greninja then fires their attack, and a massive smoke screen is formed. After landing onto the ground, the smoke disappears, with us seeing the Zygarde revert into its core, unable to battle. Ash asks himself what just happened and is in total shock that he managed to defeat the Pokemon. He then says Greninja's name, and Z2 intervenes. Z2 explains to Ash that what just happened to Greninja was a new awakening. During the time of battling alongside Ash, the bond phenomenon was unlocking more and more potential. Battling together has not only strengthened their bond, but has also allowed Greninja to manipulate its power levels when it comes to using Water Shuriken. This is why one moment a larger Water Shuriken was formed before the ultimate Shuriken was used. Squishy then mentions that this legend has only ever happened once before in the past, and it seems that Ash's Greninja has also inherited this power. Ash thinks to himself and still tries to understand what just happened, however Greninja walks up to his trainer wishing to shake their hand. They shake hands, and Ash thanks Greninja for his hard work. Z2 then mentions that this awakening comes with high reward and high risk. If the power is not controlled, then it can be fatal to not only the Pokemon, but also the person it shares the bond with. He warns Ash to not be reckless and abuse this capability. Z4 begins to wake up, and we then see that by the power of its fellow cores, its energy levels are replenished. It then bounces back onto the rock where its siblings are resting. Ash tells Greninja that he is thrilled to learn about their new power, and begins to wonder if this was the potential that the cores mentioned earlier. Meanwhile, Charizard looks down and continues to stare both at Z3 and Z5, sensing something unusual about the pair of them. The orange coloured Zygarde core named Z3 then bounces forward, and Ash continues with Greninja. Squishy tells Ash to pay close attention to his brother, as this is where the real challenge begins. Ash is full of confidence, and says to Greninja that they'll win the battle. At this moment, Pikachu begins to see how the sky starts to turn green. Zygarde cells begin to appear from different directions before combining themselves into a huge beam of green light. This light then begins to fire directly at Z3, causing it to transform. As the cells construct, a different Zygarde form begins to take shape. Ash and his Pokemon stare in amazement, whilst the cells construct to visualize a Zygarde form that resembles a very similar structure to a Triceratops. Upon reveal, Ash wonders what the true power of Zygarde really is, as he has never seen a form of this Pokemon before. Z2 then explains to Ash that Z3 is now in its 85% form. It then also mentions that the power of Zygarde and cells are something that Ash and his Pokemon are yet to learn more about. The battle continues. Ash commands Greninja to fire an Ice Beam followed by Water Shuriken. Z3 plants itself into the ground, enduring the attacks. Z3 then uses extreme speed, travelling at lightning speed, appearing instantly in front of Greninja. Greninja is caught off guard by how rapid Z3 caught up with him, and Ash is frozen. Z3 then uses its horn to fling Greninja into the air, before using a Dragon Pulse to land a hit on the Pokemon. Greninja lands on the floor and has received massive damage. Ash begins to panic, and tells Greninja to use its energy to sync with him to use a large orange Water Shuriken. Ash Greninja charges the attack, however it receives a shock, and Ash feels the pain in unison. With the attack failing to launch, Z3 races forward using extreme speed again, sending Greninja flying. Greninja then crashes into a boulder, and due to the awakened bond phenomenon, Ash also feels this pain falling to the ground. Pikachu and Charizard gasp, and Charizard swoops down to see if Ash is okay. Ash smiles, telling his Pokemon that he's fine, and turns his head to see that Greninja is unconscious and unable to battle. Ash returns Greninja to its Pokeball, thanking it for its efforts. Z5 begins to explain that he was warned to not get too comfortable with the new unlocked power. She then states that in order to master this power, Ash has to be in total focus and sync with his Pokemon, and not to be reckless. The lack of awareness caused Greninja to faint, and she also states that Ash felt the repercussions of this action. Z5 then says that Ash should have known better, and Pikachu begins to feel irritated by this comment. Ash then grinds his teeth, and Z3 stares waiting patiently for Ash's next move. Ash ends up standing up again and breathes carefully, telling himself that he needs to remain focused in order to prove himself to the Zygarde army and his Pokemon. However, he does fear what other challenges lie ahead, as he is still yet to battle the white coloured Zygarde core. Meanwhile, Kukui returns to his chair and sees a visualization of the wormholes. He is shocked to learn that more wormholes are being formed. He then begins to analyse what data can be collected for what has been revealed, and starts to learn that one wormhole contains something that has never been seen before in the universe. Kukui begins to swear, as he is unsure if this is a threat approaching, and proceeds to contact Professor Oak. Meanwhile, we get reintroduced to Lei, who is now 3 years old. He says the word Dada and looks up at his father, puzzled as to what is going on. Charizard flies high again, and the battle continues with Ash choosing Pikachu as his next Pokemon. Ash takes out his Rotom phone and tries to gather data about the newly discovered Zygarde form. However, there is no data found. Ash isn't sure if Pikachu will be able to pinpoint accurate attacks on this Pokemon, however he tells his buddy to do his best. The battle continues. Pikachu charges forward with a quick attack, while Z3 matches with extreme speed. Ash tells Pikachu to then use a Thunderbolt, however Z3 is unaffected. He then tells Pikachu to climb Z3's back, before elevating itself into the sky and using an Iron Tail. It hits in succession. Z3 then uses 1000 arrows, and Ash tells Pikachu to dodge them. Z2 remembers how strong Ash's Pikachu was, and praises how it has been able to defeat some of the strongest Pokemon in its lifetime. Z5 watches carefully. Ash tells Pikachu to use another Iron Tail on the ground, repeating an old strategy of firing shards of rock at Z3 in hopes of landing damage. As the shards fire forward, Z3 uses 1000 arrows to destroy them. It then uses a Dragon Pulse, catching Pikachu off guard. Pikachu lands to the floor and Ash asks if he is okay. Charizard continues to look at the battle carefully. Pikachu then retaliates with a strong quick attack, hitting Z3 back. Z3 is starting to become angry now, and Ash notices that whenever the Pokemon attacks, it pauses before making its next move. Ash imagines that due to the weight of the Pokemon, it takes a moment for it to regain stability before it can use another attack. Z3 then begins to charge forward with another extreme speed, and Ash yells to Pikachu, telling him to stay still. Pikachu is worried, however Ash tells him to listen to him carefully. Pikachu then looks forward and waits anxiously for Ash's command. As Z3 approaches Pikachu, Ash tells his Pokemon to use Electro Web and bounce into the sky. Aligning to the sun, Pikachu is high up in the sky directly above Z3. The other Zygarde calls are shocked and Ash commands Pikachu to bring itself down using Quick Attack and then using an Iron Tail. With the increased speed and power of both attacks combined, this allows Pikachu to smash directly into Z3, and seeing as the Pokemon is unable to respond quickly enough, the impact causes it to be hit directly into the ground. A massive smokescreen is formed, and piles of rocks covered in green aura are lifted off the ground. Ash tells Pikachu to watch out, and he begins to scurry away and evade the attacks. However, one shard manages to land on Pikachu, causing it to take massive damage. Another smokescreen is created, and Ash screams Pikachu's name. Pikachu is badly bruised and injured, however it manages to live on. Ash notices that Z3 has reverted back into its core, unable to battle. Ash runs over to Pikachu and thanks his partner on his great work. Z4 looks up to Squishy and Z2, and the pair praise Pikachu's endurance. They are not surprised in the slightest and didn't expect anything else from this Pokemon. They analyse how Ash was able to work together with his Pokemon patiently to plan a successful strategy and execute a lethal blow on their brother. However, Pikachu just about managed to escape Z3's ground aura ability, which activates once the Pokemon has fainted, causing a huge formation of rocks to be created and follow the opponent to land damage even after the Pokemon is unable to battle. Surprisingly, Pikachu was able to withstand the aftermath of this ability. Ash wipes the sweat off his head, happy that Pikachu is still okay to battle, and then Z5 hops forward in front of them. Z5 then turns its head and stares at Charizard. Charizard spits a spurt of fire. Z5 mentions that Ash and his Pokemon have shown that they have great fighting spirit and the bonds they share are one to be recognised. However, she believes that the challenge will end here. Pikachu leaps forward and slightly slips in the process. He is exhausted after all of the battling with Z3, and after taking all of this immense damage, Ash is starting to feel concerned. Charizard continues to watch carefully and calls Pikachu's name. Pikachu turns its head to look at his friend, and he begins to smile and spark electricity. Squishy says to Ash that the final challenge is ahead, and Ash responds saying that it's not over till it's over. Ash commands Pikachu to use a quick attack, while Z5 stays still. Pikachu connects with Z5, however nothing happens. Suddenly, the ground begins to shake. Ash and Pikachu both lose their balance, with Z5 beginning to radiate incredible energy. Zygarde cells from beneath the ground begin to start constructing with the core, causing Z5 to transform. However, this form is not like one before. The cells begin to form a huge bird-like Pokemon, and after the transformation is complete, Ash and his Pokemon are revealed to another new Zygarde form. Ash is speechless, with Charizard staring in shock as to what has happened to the core. Z5 says to Ash that he has no chance, and he counters by saying he'll do whatever it takes with his Pokemon, before then commanding Pikachu to use Thunderbolt. Z5 dodges the attack. Z5 then uses Draco Meteor, and Pikachu does its best to dodge the incoming meteors. However, Pikachu's speed and evasiveness has decreased since the previous battle with Z3 and gets struck by one of the meteors. Ash shouts Pikachu's name, however the electric Pokemon stands firm. Z5 then begins to charge a beam, being the move Core Enforcer. Ash begins to worry and looks at his C power ring. He calls Pikachu's name and Pikachu begins to run back. He then says the words just like how we practiced. Ash brings both of his arms forward and tells Pikachu to use a quick attack. Using the power of the attack and Ash's arms as a platform, Pikachu then sprints forward with the weight of Ash's arms lifting itself into the air. Ash throws his cap onto his partner and the two then commence to use the Z move 10 million volt Thunderbolt. As the move is executed, Z5 fires Core Enforcer with both attacks clashing in the process. Ash smirks thinking that the move landed a hit, however his expression changes as the Core Enforcer breaks directly through the Z move, obliterating Pikachu. Pikachu is unconscious and begins to fall from the sky. Ash screams in upset, and just before Z2 plans to transform and catch Pikachu, a Pokemon flies above catching him instead. Charizard then places Pikachu on the ground. Ash calls Pikachu's name, and his partner responds by opening its eyes and smiling. Ash is relieved and turns its head to look at Z5. He speaks to himself, questioning what type of Pokemon his opponent is. Ash tells Pikachu to rest and places him on the floor. He is now down to his last Pokemon, being Charizard. Z5 glares at Charizard. The rivalry between these two Pokemon has reached its peak, and Charizard begins to flare up. Z5 then speaks, stating she knows what Charizard is after, with Charizard freezing, and Ash raises his eyebrows, questioning what she meant. Z5 mentions that her aura felt that Charizard was always wanting to achieve more, and during this time, we see a small flashback of how Charizard thought to himself about how it too could be elevated with power after encountering Red and his Charizard back at Mount Silver. Ash then says Charizard's name softly, before the Pokemon turns his head to look at his trainer. As both Ash and Charizard look at each other, we see a flashback of Ash talking to his Pokemon the night he chose them in preparation of meeting Zygarde. Ash tells his Pokemon about how Zygarde had challenged them to the battle, and should they succeed, they will all reach a new potential in hopes of defeating Giovanni. He tells his Pokemon how he wants to be sure to not let them down, and he will do whatever it takes to win. We see a small celebrationary moment with Pikachu, Greninja, and Charizard before Ash looks at his Mega Glove in the sky. Ash then rubs Charizard's head, telling him to do his best. Z5 speaks to Charizard, stating that it is the last one left. Should it wish to prosper further, then there is only one thing it has to do: prove yourself. Battle resumes. Charizard roars and proceeds to fly forward. Ash commands Charizard to use a flamethrower, while Z5 uses 1000 arrows. The attacks collide. Emerging from the smokescreen, Charizard flies forward and uses a fire punch. It lands a hit. Z5 begins to fly up into the sky, and Ash runs forward and jumps onto Charizard as the pair chase after her. Squishy and Z2 are surprised by this action. Z5 tells Ash that he is foolish for thinking he is safe by doing this, and Ash responds shouting, saying he has won with his Pokemon. Ash commands Charizard to use flamethrower again before gripping onto his partner, however Z5 evades the attack. Z5 then uses Draco Meteor, and Charizard proceeds to dodge the incoming spheres. Ash then commands Charizard to use Fire Punch whilst bracing himself. It hits again. Z5 speaks up, saying, "What reckless behaviour do you hold, human?" She then proceeds to use Dragon Pulse, and Ash tells Charizard to use the same move. Pikachu sees this and smiles, and Ash speaks to himself, thanking Leon for helping him teach Charizard Dragon Pulse. Z2 mentions that the boy has come prepared. Charizard and Z5 continue their aerial fight before Z5 uses 1000 arrows. As Charizard dodges the incoming arrows, Ash loses his grip and begins to fall. Ash begins to scream as he falls from the sky. However, Charizard flies down to catch his trainer. Z5 then swoops back down, warning him to stay out of the way. She then mocks Charizard, stating that he has wasted all his energy for nothing. At this point, Charizard is beginning to feel tired, and his speed doesn't match the lights of Z5. Ash then commands Charizard to charge forward at Z5 to get closer to the Pokemon. Once in range, Charizard then uses Dragon Tail to smack Z5 in the chest. Ash jumps with joy after the attack connects. He then commands Charizard to fire Dragon Pulse directly onto Z5. As the attack hits, Z5 falls to the ground. Charizard flies back, believing that the battle is over. However, it is not. Z5 then begins to charge a Core Enforcer, however Charizard is unaware of this. As the attack fires, Pikachu looks up at his trainer, and Ash tries to warn Charizard. The attack catches up on him. The impact of the attack then transitions to us seeing Charizard getting hit before it turns into a void. We then transition to Charizard's vision. The Pokemon begins to see more visions of previous events, showcasing back when it went through great pain and how Ash cared for him. We see a flashback of when Ash healed Charizard back when it was frozen against Poliwrath. We also see flashbacks of Charizard battling against Nolan's Articuno, the battle against Entei, and how it battled against Red. Charizard then sees a vision of a blurred figure. It appears to show a Pokemon whose wings are coloured in red and blue with green energy emitting from it. He then hears Ash's voice saying, "Do your best, Charizard." The vision ends and we see Charizard collapse to the floor. Ash runs over to Charizard, asking if he's okay. He then angrily turns his head to Z5, and before he could speak, Charizard picks itself up again. The remaining Zygarde calls jump down, and Z5 lands onto the ground. Charizard begins to slowly walk forward to Z5, aiming to try and scratch the Pokemon. However, after squaring up to the Pokemon, it collapses in front of it. Ash is frozen, and the calls begin to use their energy to try and heal Charizard. However, it fails. Ash tries to wake Charizard up, but there is no response. He also notices that the flame on Charizard's tail is beginning to go down. Z5 then picks Charizard up, and Ash asks where they're going with the calls telling him to follow them. Heading back into the bunker, Ash and the calls arrive back at the lake from earlier where the water is coloured green. Z5 tosses Charizard into the lake and tells Ash to wait. Suddenly, the lake begins to react and sound waves begin to vibrate on the water. Z5 tells Ash that the water has Zygarde healing properties, and Ash stays silent. She continues to tell Ash that he recognises his courage and determination, matching with strength and care. During the conversation, the vibrations in the water intensify. Z5 then asks if he is aware of the connection with Zygarde and Mega Evolution. Ash responds with those words. We then skip to see Giovanni approach a green test tube and begins to clap. As the test tube opens, we see a tall, humanoid Pokemon appear. The Pokemon revealed is Mewtwo, however its appearance is different from the usual. This Mewtwo has half of its body coloured in black and green, depicting a similar appearance to Zygarde. Giovanni then says that he is honoured to have Mewtwo back with him. Mewtwo tries to break conversation, asking what Team Rocket has done to it. However, the wires connected to its back shock the Pokemon, causing its right eye to turn green. Giovanni says to the Pokemon that it now reports to him and will obey all his orders. Skipping back, Charizard lays in the water and begins to glow. Ash's Mega Ring then begins to react to the vibrations, and out of nowhere, Zygarde cells start to insert themselves into his keystone. The keystone begins to turn green. Ash is blinded by the intense light and lifts his hand into the air. The cellular energy redirects itself and fires towards Charizard.